Explorer, this is Houston.
Go ahead, Houston.
Mission abort. Repeat. Mission abort.
The sunrise. Terrific.
You know, you can often feel with movies that, you know, there are two movie worlds. There's the kind of big budget Hollywood multiplex world of, you know, movies that fill out the top 20 at the box office, and then there's this other world of indies and movies that are headed for Oscar and that are more mid-range, whatever. It's almost like these two worlds that exist in Hollywood, and Gravity sort of seems to straddle them both and combine them, which is like a rare, like Christopher Nolan occupies that kind of space, you know, where...
Yeah, but I think, I mean, that's a really interesting point, because I think in the last 10 years or so, the middle budget movie has just ceased to exist. It's just, studios don't make those films anymore. So you found an incredible separation of church and state in terms of these huge budget blockbuster tentpole films, which
make $1 billion worldwide, you know?
Or don't. But ultimately, the cost of releasing films now is such that it's only in the studio's interest. This is what drives it. It's not about the audience and what they want to see. It's about basically how much does it cost to put a film out. There's something that Soderbergh talked about in his speech, where if you make a film that costs $80 to $100 million, or you make a film that costs $30 million, you still have to spend $60 million or $50 million or whatever it is on a worldwide release. So it's more in your...
So those are marketing and...
Yeah, just P&A, just advertising, marketing, all of that. Just it costs a hell of a lot of money to put out a film on a you know, a 3,000 screen run. Right. So for example, take The Butler. The Butler was, and I'm making this up, so I might be wrong. How much? 20?
30 million.
30. Okay. So they would have spent, you know, that's one of those rare, and they're creeping back in now, which I think is terrific. I haven't seen The Butler, but
I saw it.
But those kind of films which are punching above their weight because they're made for a smaller budget, but they're still getting mass releases. The Butler came out, I think I'm right in saying, on 2,700 screens. So it's got a huge push, and the audience is crying out for those films again.
It's the only film aimed at grown-ups the whole summer.
Which is why it's going to do incredibly well, because it's come off the back of tentpole after tentpole after tentpole, where those films are being made for China. Do you know what I mean? Those films are being made,
and for 12 to 18-year-old boys the world over.
Well, yeah, or at least that demographic has to be served in a major way. It's a bit unfair to say that they're only being made for that, but you have to incorporate their desires and what they want to see when you make a film above a certain budget. And there is no way around that. And some would say, me included, that is potentially the death of Hollywood. Do you know what I mean? Because by the time the Chinese or those markets figure out how to make their own films, see you later, Hollywood. Do you know what I mean? On that budget, which they will. They don't have the infrastructure in the industry to do that just yet on the mass scale that Hollywood does, but they will do soon. And by the time the 12 to 18-year-olds of that demographic actually finally stop going to the cinema, which they are doing, and instead tune into their gaming, that audience will disappear. And it's already begun to happen. So that's why you're seeing, in a way, these more interesting films. You know, 12 Years a Slave was, I think, scheduled to cost 30 million, and they could not pre-sell that film.
Yeah.
I think they got a couple of small sales. So they had to.
I think they call those films execution dependent. Exactly.
And I think the more those films are being well executed, which clearly these ones are, the more we're seeing resurgence in I think, films that are being nominated for Best Picture that are also commercially viable. Because up until for the last 4 or 5 years, all the films that were being nominated for Best Picture were, or at least the majority, were not particularly commercial movies.
Yeah. Well, that's actually changed in the last few years. I think there was the year that True Grit, Black Swan, Social Network.
Yeah, I mean,
all made over 100 million, and everything else flopped. And it happened last year again with Lincoln and Argo and Silver Linings and Jack. You know, well, suddenly all these great films are making loads of money. So clearly there is an audience. You know, I mean, well, back to Gravity. The interesting thing about Gravity is that in terms of budget, in terms of visuals, and it's a big, spectacular, you have never seen this before special effects movie. But it's also one of the most auteur-driven films I've ever seen. It's so ambitious in its technique. I mean, I think the first shot is about an hour long. It's one take. And I mean, I know it's animated, but literally the camera just never stops moving. And I even lost track, and I was like, something like, hang on a second, has this even cut yet?
Wow.
You know what I mean? And, okay, I mean, here's the thing. Yeah, a lot of people thought it was going to be an art film set in space. It's not an art film set in space. I mean, it's an action film. It's one situation after another that she has to deal with. And I found it quite emotional. I found it emotionally affecting. Which I feel with all of Alfonso Cuarón's films. Yeah, I mean, I found it. I really liked her character. I liked George Clooney's character. I found it really. Yeah, I found it. It was an emotional journey as well as a physical, visual one. But it's not a particularly profound philosophical. It's not 2001. I mean, it wears its themes on its sleeve. And I didn't have a problem with that. I was like, this is a movie for the masses, but it's a beautifully made, auteur-driven, pushing the envelope, technically, smart movie for the masses.
Yeah.
It's not an art film that the masses might go and see. It's definitely made with a wide audience in mind, but that trusts that a huge audience wants to see something smart and risky and beautiful,
Yeah.
Which is what I loved about it. But I think if you go in there expecting like a real kind of, philosophical meditation on humanity and space, you're not going to get that. And I think some people were slightly disappointed because they really wanted it to be a $200 million art film.
Well, thank God it's not, because no one should be spending $200 million on an art film.
Exactly.
I think Cuarón is far and away the most individual mainstream filmmaker working today, more so than Nolan, I think, in terms of what he's
definitely pushing it in terms of technique. I mean, I know he invented
also variety. If you look at his body of work, it's every film he does is so singular and individual, and kind of it's like he's a novelist. He really does create a self-contained piece of work with every piece of work. He's not always working within the same genre, or it's quite extraordinary, amazing.
It's interesting the way you can see how it's an evolution from Children of Men. Children of Men, those long takes. Like he filmed I think there's the three biggest action scenes in Children of Men are like single takes that go on and on. I know there's some cheating, like that he made some cuts that you just can't notice, but the feeling is the same. And I think what's interesting is that in the predominant movie culture of cut, the kind of Michael Bay, Tony Scott school of action filmmaking, that most, and even the Bourne films, I think Paul Greengrass does it really well, but most action films try to do that, and it's cut, you don't even know what you're looking at anymore. And to see like well thought out choreography and how you become invested in something when it's not cutting away, and it's like the camera knows where to go and what to show you. It's
Well, Greengrass is kind of like a really good sushi chef. Like every cut he makes is very specific and very clean, and he understands.
He does, and the whole of Hollywood's trying to do what he does.
Yeah, but the majority of those people emulating that don't actually have any thought to why they're cutting. They just want to create a tone which, after a while, overtakes the storytelling. But Emmanuel Lubezki, the cinematographer of Gravity, who I think did Children of Men as well.
Yeah.
He's somebody. Let's see what he's done. He
did Tree of Life.
He did Tree of Life. Yeah. I would love. I'm going to say lots of really nice things about him because I'd like.
You're going to get lots of work out of this, and I'm going to get blacklisted.